Hello, hello. This video is going to share some insights on my experiences with revisiting the vibraphone solo Mourning Dove Sonnet. And in this video, I hope to provide you with some tips and advice that'll help you with your own interpretations and performances. As I'm sure most of you already know, if you've ever had to relearn a piece of music, it doesn't necessarily mean that you start the process over from scratch. There may be a lot of things you remember about the last time you learned this piece, but there also may be some things that you may not have realized or considered the first time around. So for me personally, revisiting Mourning Dove Sonnet was framed with two things in mind. The first, how can I be more effective and more efficient in my performance? And second, if I were to teach this piece to someone, what sort of advice could I offer them? So the first thing I'd like to talk about are the bowing indications in Mourning Dove Sonnet. The bow markings in this piece are directly borrowed from the notation system used for the string family. Up bows, as you know, begin with the tip of the bow, and down bows begin with the frog of the bow. But if you think about how that translates for percussionists, the terminology actually gives you opposing results. So an up bow, starting with the tip, is actually downward in direction, and a down bow is actually physically upward. The first time I learned this piece many years ago, I executed the bowings as they were written, but I always had some physical awkwardness with my body, particularly trying to contort my wrist and my arm to do the up bow on the natural bars of the instrument. So in this spot in the piece, I'm looking at basically like measure 21 onward to about measure 32. You can see that when I'm up bowing the natural bars, I'm kind of like squatting my body downward. And although this may look, like a larger gesture, maybe it might be too much movement, maybe. To me, it is a bit easier on the arm and wrist. And I also feel like you get this kind of like seesaw effect between the low notes that are bowed on the naturals and the high notes that are bowed on the accidentals. So to kind of, put things in perspective with this video, I read a book by this author, Nicholas Cook. It's called Beyond the Score, Music as Performance. And one chapter of the book, he talks about this idea of scores as social scripts. I think it's chapter 8. And there's one point in particular that I think is very relatable for us percussionists. He compares music scores to scripts that theater actors have. And this kind of gave me an idea. Actors not only have lines that they are to say aloud, but they also might have stage directions, which could indicate their gestures or actions. So for percussionists, sometimes we have stage directions too. Think about Mourning Dove Sonnet. We have things to consider like stick changes, or changing from sticks to the bows, or changing from bows to the sticks. So this got me thinking about one thing. Do all of these stage directions make sense where they are? Do any of these instructions to change sticks or to change the bows, does it interfere with how I execute the material that comes before or during or after these indications? Now, if we take a look at the score, most of the bow or mallet changes that happen in the piece, they usually happen at fermatas. The vibraphone is ringing, the motor might be just on and sustaining, so we have plenty of time to do that. But are there any spots where I can be more efficient by not exactly following the composer's instructions about when to do these stick changes? So if you take a look in the score at measures 40 through 49, there are only two bowed notes, and they're both on that high C in the right hand. So the rest of this passage, you're just using two mallets. You're using a normal vibraphone mallet in the left hand, and then you're using a plastic mallet to do the pitch bending in the right. So it got me thinking, if I only need these two mallets to play most of this passage, is there a way that I can set the bow down sooner? So I came up with a way to get rid of the bows much faster, to free up my hands to execute this passage. So if you start at the gesture at measure 39, I call these things warps. They just sound like something in reverse. So you play those two notes and then you do things hand to hand. The last bowed note in the left hand is that low G, and then you have the A flat that's in the right. And then as soon as you do those two high C's, you can get rid of the bow up in that right hand. So then once you get to the figure that starts at the end of page 1, all you're holding are just the two mallets you need to execute this passage. And the really interesting thing about this too is that when you get to that flurry of eighth notes in measure 49, you can play those one-handed and then have your right hand with the pitch bending mallet get ready to flip on the motor as soon as you're done. Just imagine trying to hold the bows through this passage and still quickly get to the motor as soon as possible. I had one performance when I first learned this piece where I almost knocked over a music stand with my bow because I was trying to flip on the motor so fast in this spot. So the next thing I wanted to talk about in thinking about this concept of stage directions, which for us is like stick changes, is talking about the mute. And as you know, the mute in this piece it's placed on the low 4 naturals. You have F, G, A, and B. Those are the pitches that the mute covers. And if you take a look at measure 123, you have this gesture that is it's the literal transcription of the dove call in this piece. And at the end of this measure, it says remove mute here, and you have a kind of shortened fermata that gives you time to do that. But for me, I feel like this gesture kind of gets in the way of what's happening musically, because this dove call, it's basically repeated 3 times, and every time has a slightly different ending. The second time has that little quintuplet figure at pianissimo, and then the last time it is kind of elongated to transition into that rolled chord. But if you think about the pitches that the mute is covering, you don't need any of those notes between measure 123 and the fermata at the end of that second line there on 127, I think is the measure number. So you can just leave that mute there and play this passage and not have the music be disturbed by this gesture. So play the first dove call, give it some time, play the second one, play the third one, and then you have that crescendoed D major chord, F sharp in the bass, D, and then A. And then you can play that flurry of eighth notes, flip on that motor, remove the mute there, and then grab the bows, or grab the bows first and then remove the mute. You don't need any of those notes, so why disrupt the musical material when you can just do it that way? So I just wanted to wrap up by kind of bringing home some points. The first is whenever you relearn or revisit a piece of music, always look at it with a very critical lens. Think about what you did well, what didn't go so well. Think about what you'd like to change about your interpretation or what you would like to improve about your performance. We're always, seeing outward with our eyeballs, but it's okay to close them for a minute and think about what you know. So I hope you enjoyed this, and if you're learning Mourning Dove, good luck, and I hope this helped you, and just keep making music.